supposed to be away from it, inshallah. So this is a perfect opportunity to bring ourselves closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And earlier in your khutbah of Jummah, I heard you saying about how the person who makes an effort to get closer to Allah, you come walking to Allah and Allah comes running to you. Alhamdulillah, and that was very moving, inshallah, Shaykh. So please, if you can share some more inspiring thoughts and ideas how we can make the best of these 10 nights. And I hear Laylatul Qadr from your khutbah earlier should be in the last 10 nights as well. So how we can focus our efforts and attention, inshallah.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair, Brother Wazir, mashallah. Alhamdulillah, all of us, we've fasted, alhamdulillah, we've been reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are attending the masjid for Salatul Taraweeh, and all of this taqarrubat to Allah subhanahu, all of this works that take us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's something very important that we shouldn't forget, and I'm sure we've been reminded, and maybe it's become something that has become maybe a form of worship that's become almost a form of routine. But we have to realize that the asl from all of these types of ibadat, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, and Siyam was written upon you as it was prescribed with those that came before you, so that you may be people of taqwa and of piety. And ultimately, Ramadan has to be seen in that light, in that it's not only a month of Siyam, which it is, and of Quran, and of Tilawah, and of Taraweeh, all of this, which is true. But however, ultimately, the motive from all of this is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And although I'm sure we have heard this many a time, and I'm sure we've heard our ulama and khutbah mentioning this, but we have to be very, very focused on the fact that we live in times now where Ramadan almost has become a festivity. And we hear also, sometimes we hear or see these adverts for in these famous supermarkets, it's a Ramadan feast. And it makes me sort of stand up a little bit, because it's not a feast, it's not a festivity as such. It's a time in which we reconnect ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you look historically at Ramadan and what took place in the month of Ramadan, in the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and that which came after, it was a month in which great futuhat, great openings, great victories were bestowed upon the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason for this is because the month of Ramadan is a month of tasfiyah and tarbiyah and tazkiyah, which is a month of purifying, a month of taking ourselves out from ourselves, and a moment of spiritual change. And the reason why, when we look back at our history, we see that many great battles, many great victories have occurred in this month, is because of the fact that this month prepares you for great things. It's an opener. You could say it's a fatih. It's something that gives you the opening to greater of that which comes thereafter. It's for this reason that companions radiallahu ta'ala anhum in the month of Ramadan, it's no surprise that that's the great victory of Badr took place within this month. The great victory of the opening of Makkah al-Mukarramah took place within this month. And this is only within the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And those that came after them realized that Ramadan enables you to have a connection, and a deep connection with God, and a manifestation of a cognizance of the reality of God and His dunya, that people thereafter also chose the month of Ramadan to be the month in which they would perform great feats or remove oppression. So we hear, for example, that Tariq ibn Ziyad in 92 after Hijrah, he, in the same month of Ramadan, in the Battle of Barbat, he was the same month in which Andalus came into the possession of the believers. And also we hear in 658 after Hijrah, we also hear that Ain al-Jalut, the famous battle which the Mongols and the Egyptians also took place in the month of Ramadan. We hear also the Battle of Umuriyah also took place in the month of Ramadan. So the month of Ramadan is something that we should now take out of our minds as just a period of prayer, or a period to stop ourselves from what we wouldn't do outside, but rather we should transform that understanding that this is rather a moment of change, a moment of transformation, a moment of inner introspection, a moment of where we can be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all moments, not just in the moments of Ramadan. And this, before we move on to the last 10 days, inshallah, which are the pinnacle, you could say, of the month of Ramadan, we just remind ourselves that There's a famous hadith narrated of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And it's a long hadith, but the gist of the hadith, Sayyidina Ali, he mentions in the night before Eid, called Laylatul Jaza, called a night of recompense. He mentions in that in a night of recompense on the day of Eid, he doesn't know what to say to people. فَأَعْمَالُهُ مَقْبُولٌ فَيُهَنِّيهِ. Is that a person whose actions have been accepted so that I may thank him, I may congratulate him. Or عَمَلُ مَرْدُودًا فَأُعَزِّيهِ. Or his actions have been rejected so that I may commiserate him, or pass him my commiserations. Meaning that worship in itself in the month of Ramadan, yes, but at the end of the month of Ramadan, it has to be a transformation has to take place. If a person starts to think that he's going to go back to what he was before Ramadan, and this is just a temporary halt, then unfortunately, we return back to the words of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu when he mentions these words, and it's as if it's almost from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that he's not sure whether to congratulate such a person or whether the person should be the recipient of his commiserations. So we have to be in a scenario and situation that we have changed our minds and change our thoughts and change our perceptions of Ramadan. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at our end of our affairs as how He judges us, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when the hadith, when the Prophet mentioned umur bi khawatimiha, the matters are by the ends. Depending on how a person ends, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take a person and inshallah forgive that which has passed previously. And this is the way in which we look at things. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, "Man akhir kalamuhu la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah." The person whose last words are la ilaha illallah, he is entrance into Jannah, inshallah.
So if I could just recap, inshallah, from what you say, if my memory is captured properly. So just because is to use Ramadan as a means to get closer to Allah. The first 20 days are coming to an end, and just because certain people, some of us might not have made the most of it, there's still 10 nights remaining. So use that, because matters are judged by the ending. So make the use of those 10 days. It's never too late to actually make that effort and begin your compulsory duties and your voluntary duties as well. So is that a fair summary from what I've understood from what you've been saying, Sheikh?
Absolutely. The last 10 nights has the pinnacle of all of the month of Ramadan, which is Laylatul Qadr. I'm going to come to that in a moment, inshallah. And as we come to Laylatul Qadr and the last 10 nights, as we come to these moments, we should realize that regardless of what has gone before, we can still make good within these last 10 nights. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, "Iltamisuha fi ashr al-awakhir," and seek the epitome and the pinnacle of this month, seek it in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, within which there is the famous night and the most blessed night of Laylatul Qadr, خَيْرٌ مِنْ أَلْفِ شَهْرٍ, that which is better than 1,000 months. And we'll come to that in a moment. So initially we should think of Ramadan, as some scholars of Tazkiyah have mentioned it, as a takhliyah qabla al-tahliyah, which means to purify ourselves and to prepare ourselves with divesting ourselves of vice and evil, and then filling that with virtue and with worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So inshallah, Sheikh, from what you're saying is there's still plenty that we can make yourself, and essentially at this point, from this point on, from tomorrow night, the last 10 nights begin, if I'm correct, and there's still time to prepare and bring ourselves to that level where we can actually make the most of those 10 nights and search in those last 10 nights. What you're going to be covering is called Laylatul Qadr, and there's an entire surah in the Quran that's dedicated or named after Laylatul Qadr to give us the importance of that night and how much the Qadr itself, and hopefully you'll be covering a bit of that, inshallah ta'ala. Have I understood that still, Shaykh?
Yes, we on Saturday night at the time of Maghrib, we will enter into the 21st night of Ramadan.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, the nights precede the day in Islam. So as we enter into that night, know that we have entered into one of the nights in which it's possible for it to be Laylatul Qadr. What occurred with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This is a great wisdom within this. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is mentioned, the Prophet came out to his companions. بليلة القدر, in ليلة القدر. Then the hadith mentioned about تلاحى الرجلان من المسلمين. There were two believers who were discussing or arguing, you could say, and their voices were raised and tempers flared amongst each other. So the Prophet ﷺ, seeing this manzar, seeing this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala occurred something to happen at that particular moment. And this is great wisdom for us to take away from this. And as Prophet said, the Prophet said, خرجت لأخبركم بليلة القدر فتلاحى فلان وفلان فرفعت. He said, I came to tell you about Laylatul Qadr. خير من ألف شهر, a night better than 1,000 months. But however, I saw such and such a person, such a person. And this is the adab of the Prophet. He doesn't mention the names of the people who did this. He mentioned, I saw these people arguing and wrangling with each other. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised this knowledge from me. But what did the Prophet say thereafter? He says, فَعَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونَ خَيْرًا لَكُمْ. Perchance this is better for you. Perchance this is better for you. Meaning what? Meaning that even though we've lost the exact time or where Laylatul Qadr is, but however, the Prophet ﷺ did mention to us, "Al-tamisuhu fi ashr al-awakhir." Seek this in the last 10 days, or the last 10 nights, I should say, of Ramadan. So then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, and within the last 10 nights, Laylatul Qadr is. Now scholars have mentioned and spoken about this in length. Did the Prophet ﷺ know in that particular year and thereafter he forgot or was made to forget by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Was the year following it, was he aware of what night it was? And there's a huge discussion amongst our great scholars on this whole issue. Because unfortunately sometimes we are under the opinion that it's the 27th night, which is not necessarily the case.
Sorry, Sheikh, I've interrupted you on purpose. It's just because online I've got a couple of my friends who I wanted to call out for, Becky and Sally, who are watching as well, watching you right now, giving the talk on Laylatul Qadr. And I just wanted to elaborate that this is the fasting month where we've been fasting today for the 20th day, which is called Ramadan. And part of that fasting is in the last 10 nights, there's a special night in there that's called Laylatul Qadr. So just in case you're wondering what Sheikh Zakir here is talking about, that's what he's elaborating on. And I just wanted to thank everybody else who's joining to listen to you via Facebook right now. I've got my brother Shizad and a couple of other colleagues from my old hospital, Royal London Hospital, who are joining in. And from Mauritius as well, I see my sister-in-law joining in, inshallah. Just so you know what we're talking about today, we're talking about Laylatul Qadr. We are live on 102.5 EAVA FM, which is Ramadan FM. And Sheikh Zakir here from Darul Arqam is our Sheikh who is elaborating on the last 10 nights, which starts from tomorrow night, 21st night, inshallah. So those of you who are fasting, please try and get the benefit of the advice that's been given here by Sheikh.
Yeah. So as we were mentioning, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised the actual night of when Laylatul Qadr is. Now the scholars have mentioned that actually Laylatul Qadr most likely actually traverses throughout the last 10 nights, meaning that, and that's witr, and that's the odd number. So meaning it's the 21st, or the 23rd, or the 25th, or the 27th, or the 29th. And scholars have mentioned that the rotation of this occurs throughout every year that Laylatul Qadr approaches. And like we said, as the Prophet ﷺ said, "Asa an yakuna khayran lakum." Perchance is better for you, meaning that we become ones that seek that blessed night throughout the last 10 nights, And the Prophet ﷺ, when the last 10 nights would approach, the Prophet ﷺ would, as the hadith mentioned, شَدَّ الْإِذَارِ, and he would tighten his loincloth, which is a similitude for that he would be extremely serious in worship, extremely serious in finding time to seek that night, which is better than 1,000, better than 1,000 months. And that in itself goes back to the Prophet, to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the companions were with the Prophet. And the Prophet mentioned to them about the nations that came previously. And the nation that came previously, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, the ages were greatly multiplied over the ages of our ummah. And the Prophet ﷺ, the age of this ummah is between 60 and 70. However, the that came before, the nation that came before, their age was sometimes for 1,000, as Allah mentions, 1,000 except 50 for Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam. So when the companions heard this, they were greatly affected by the fact that nations have come before them. They have worshipped Allah maybe for 1,000 months in continuity, and that's in comparison to their short lifespan of only 60 to 70. So it's for this that when they heard this, they showed there was a degree of sadness and remorse that they could not be like the nation that came previous. And this tells you something about the mindset of the companions, that they were those sabbaq fil khayrat, they were those who would compete with each other in good deeds, and in worship, and in ibadah, and in khidmah, and in service to the nations. So with this in mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Qadr. And within Surah Al-Qadr, as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَلْفِ shahr, the night is better than 1,000 months. So this was the intent of the companions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed this upon the ummah so they can also seek from this great reward and this great transformation that we can perform within, inshallah, these last 10 days, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, Sheikh. Sheikh, that was quite an interesting bit that I think I've heard many times, but I've completely forgotten about how the people of Nuh alayhi salam, they lived literally for 1,000 years. I think Nuh himself lived to be 900 and odd years before the flood and everything else that happened. Alhamdulillah. So Laylatul Qadr is essentially a compensation for us who have got the shorter lifespan, which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith would be around about 60 years of age, 60 or 70 years of age, and as an average, not an exact number. And Laylatul Qadr is that one night that can give us the chance of those along the descendants of the line of mankind who've gone to lie to have shorter lifespan, to actually make up in that one night, to make up in terms of ibadah for what those who are given extremely long life, inshallah. So that's a good reminder in itself to encourage myself, inshallah, to step up what I've been doing, and especially that we've got short nights, because us here in Leicester, we're breaking our fast just after 9 o'clock, and we are doing sehri around about us Adar al-Qam is 1:22, which essentially is 19 hours of fast, or just over 19 hours. That means that leaves us essentially with 5 hours where we have to stand in Taraweeh for an hour. We have to do our Maghrib, we have to do our Eesha as well. So essentially in between, I know yourself who was in Ittikaf previously and other nights that we spent with you during Ramadan, you encourage us just before Sehri, even though it's very short between Taraweeh ending, to do at least 2 rakah of tahajjud. Tahajjud. So this is one of the ways I know, just by spending time with you, I know how you've encouraged us to make the most of the night, even if it is 2 rakah, short rakah, and you recited short surah, but you make use of it and do 2 extra supernumerary rakah, inshallah, to make the most of it. So inshallah, I think we've got 4 more minutes before the next break. Is that correct? Inshallah, coming up. So inshallah, we look forward to some more of your beneficial reminder, inshallah.
As we were mentioning, Laylatul Qadr, it's now almost upon us, alhamdulillah, from the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we aim to do within the Laylatul Qadr, as we've mentioned, the night is very, very short, extremely short in fact. It's approximately, by the time we finish our Salat al-Taraweeh, it's approximately 12 o'clock and 1:22 that I mentioned, according to one timing. So it's up an hour and a half or just under that. So it's very important we start organizing our time now from this point, to seek out that night, to transform us and our futures, inshallah ta'ala. So how can we do this? First of all, a person should have a duration of time which is in the recitation of the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's say he makes a timetable, or she makes a timetable for themselves for a certain duration. Thereafter, there's tahajjud, which the Prophet ﷺ used to pray to 8 rakats, or a person can pray to, even 2. And think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is descending to the first heaven. هل من مستغفر فيستغفر له هل من ذي حاجة فيستوفي حاجته. Is that a person who seeks my forgiveness that I may forgive him? is that a person who seeks a need that may fulfill. So Allah is descending, Allah is coming and listening to us, and into the first heaven. And what better time can there be than in the month of Ramadan for our du'as, inshaAllah ta'ala, to be accepted? So this is a moment in which we can take great benefit of within this time. Thereafter, also a person should think that have tadarru', brokenness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For one who is there from amongst you who has not committed misdemeanors. When the Prophet ﷺ, كل بني آدم خطائين وخير الخطائين توابون, all of Banu Adam are sinners, and the best of those that sin are those that seek to turn back to Allah in repentance. So this is the moment of repentance. This is the moment of turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, this is a dua that said the Prophet ﷺ was questioned about. In fact, Sayyidina Aisha, our mother, anha, she asked the Prophet ﷺ, she said, if I seek Laylatul Qadr, and a Laylatul Qadr is upon us, what is it that I should recite? And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the dua, a very short dua, inshallah, we should all try to recite this. Allahumma innaka kareemun afuun tuhibbu afwa fa'afu anna. Oh Allah, you are generous and you are the forgiving. So the one that forgives, forgive us. And this is a dua that should be constantly upon our tongues, especially during this night. The night in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is throwing out, you could say, his hand of mercy to all those that wish to seek it, and for them to be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Can I just recap on that dua, especially for those who are not very familiar with the Arabic? Is that Allahumma innaka afuun karimun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni? Is that correct?
There's various versions. If you're saying it as a plural, as I have said, if you said it individually as you've said, Allahumma innaka afuun karimun tuhibbu al-afwa fa'afu anna.
That's for us.
That's for us as a plural, inshallah. And you can recite it individually, or you can recite it in a plural setting as well, inshallah, with the intention that we are inciting and including all of our ummah of the Prophet sallallahu within this dua. And also, this is a night in which is mentioned in certain narrations that Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam descends upon the earth with a group of angels. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk more about this in due time. But this has been mentioned by Imam Bayhaqi in Shu'ab al-Iman, that Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam descends upon this night, and each person finds in dua, each person finds in dhikr, each person finds something from ibadah. Now, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam makes a dua also for them, and greets them, and responds to their greeting and to their dua.
Inshallah. I just want to remind our listeners, we are here on 102.5 FM. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back after this. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're back live in the studio on 102.5 FM, Ramadan FM. We're here with Sheikh Zakir in the studio from Darul Arqam. We are tonight talking about the last 10 nights of Ramadan, which starts as of tomorrow night, inshallah. And Sheikh Zakir, in the first part of this program, we've been talking about the last 10 nights. Essentially, first point that you mentioned, Sheikh, was about how our affairs in Deen of Islam is how our affairs are judged by the ending. So even for those of us who've not managed to make the most of those first 20 days and 20 nights, it's never too late. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one Allah says to his believers is, if you come walking towards me, I'll come running to you. And the second point you made was about Laylatul Qadr in the Quran, where it talks about how it's better than 1,000 nights, and it appears, the most evidence shows to say that it appears in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. And how Nuh alayhi salam, in his time, they were given extremely long life, almost in thousands, and us as compensation who live around about 60, 70 years, we've been given Laylatul Qadr to compensate for the short life. And the third point that you made that I can remember of is the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, who instructed Aisha radiallahu ta'ala to say, Allahumma innaka afoon kareemun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni, or anna, depending if you're singular or in a plural group.
Yes. So we are now have to contemplate that these moments that we are passing through. And while we are going through these last 10 days of Ramadan, and Allah's mercy is without measure descending upon the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ within Ramadan, and khasatan, and especially and specifically within the last 10 days of Ramadan. And within that, there's going to be the famous night of Laylatul Qadr. That night, khayru min alfi shahr, as we mentioned. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also mentioned upon the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ that there are certain individuals whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will withhold His mercy from. And if you look at these individuals from whom Allah withholds mercy from, even within this blessed night, there are reasons for this. It's not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, EAVA billah, bil abid, as if Allah is an oppressor for mankind, for His slaves. And from those people, the Prophet alayhi salatu was salam, يُغْفَرْ لَهُمْ إِلَّا أَرْبَعٍ, 4 people who will be accepted, an exception from that. And from those, first of all, is qati al-rahim, the person who has and severs family relations. And if a person gives this some thought, that family relations are the most khas, which means the most closest relationships a person has with others. And if those relationships to those who are the most closest to a person are severed, you can imagine what the rest of the relationships must be like of this person. So it's almost as if this is like a scenario, situation which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing a person attention to, that those who deserve your best mu'ashara, your best company and your best interaction, those are the people that deserve your best interaction. And the person who cuts these people off, it's as if this person is now more intent to cut off other people from the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. So when it's mentioned, when qati rahim, the person cuts his family relations, this is how it should be understood. There's a famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when said Aisha when she said ar-rahm mu'alliqa bil arsh ar-rahman, that the family relations between people is suspended upon the throne of ar-Rahman, of the most merciful. And then it says, Man wasalani wasalahu Allah, wa muqata'ani qata'ahu Allah. Then it says that whoever joins and whoever unites between families and brings families together, this Allah will bring them together. And whoever disunites families and sheds or tears families apart, this person, Allah will separate him from others. So this is the first person who, even on the blessed night of Laylatul Qadr, will not be the recipient of Allah's forgiveness. And this actually follows on from the next person also. Now, when it's mentioned, Mushahin, now the person who Mushahin Yusarim, the person who moves amongst people, and he transports news from one person to another. And whether it's true or not, the person has no consideration. and it transports ghiba from one person to another, backbiting or slander from one person to another. And the sole intent of this person is to cause dissension and to disunite family ties and to break relationships amongst people. So this person also will be not the recipient of Allah's divine mercy in this great night of Laylatul Qadr. So this is a person who Allah subhanahu mentions, Masha' bin Namim, the person who carries Namima from one person to another. And as the Prophet said, Namam la yadkhulul Jannah, the person who is a Namam, the person who does this with intent of causing dissensions and hardship amongst people and heartache amongst individuals, this person will not be a person who will enter into Jannah, according to the words of the Prophet ﷺ. So these are two individuals who will be withheld from the barakah of that night. Following on from that, also the person aqal walidain, the person who is one who has severed his relationship by those who are the most closest to him, and those are his two parents, his mother and his father. And what can we say about mother and father? What can we say about this? And you can speak volumes about the rights of parents and the rights of those most closest to you. But this person who also has a follow-on from the other two will also be severed from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Laylatul Qadr, because if we give it some thought, that if a person can't rectify that which is between the most closest to him and can't show mercy to those who are most closest to him, what do you think this will be the situation of those who are further from him? And who has the most right to husnul ma'ashara? Who has the right to the person to have the best of interaction? When the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this, and he mentioned ummuk, your mother, and he mentioned it thrice, and thereafter he said abuk, and he mentioned your father. So these are people who have the greatest right to our good company. And if you think about subhanAllah, the time of the early generation, we forget that the early generation, when they reach what they reach from the great heights of piety and the great heights of the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this was not just reached by worship alone. This is something Shaykh Muhammad Hassan Basri, he mentions, ما وصلنا إليه من كثرة العبادة لكن النصح للناس وبحسن الصدر. We reach what we reach not due to the plenitude of our worship, but our sincerity for benefit from mankind, and also for our sincerity in advising people. So when they mentioned this, when they mentioned when Hassan Basri mentioned this is how it's to be understood, that it's to do with relationships and how you bring benefit to others in addition to also your individual worship. And then the Prophet ﷺ thereafter mentioned the fourth from amongst them. He mentions Mushahin, Ayusarim, he mentioned Aql Walidain, Qati al-Rahim, and then the fourth he mentioned for the Mudmin al-Khamr, the person who is a person who is addicted to alcohol.
Sheikh, we've got a phone call that's just coming in, inshallah.
Okay.
So I wonder if you'll be able to pick up your headphones, inshallah, and we might be patched in.
Yeah, inshallah. Just to finish off the last the fourth you mentioned was Mudbil al-Khamr, which means the person who's has an addiction to alcohol to the extent by which the rights of others and the duties of others are not fulfilled. So these are the four that mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ. So these are means that if we have any relationships with others which are severed or broken, this is the time in which inshallah ta'ala we need to repair those and to return back to those people, inshallah, and to ask and be the mubadar, be the first person who seeks their forgiveness. For the person who seeks forgiveness is better than the one who receives it, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah, we're going to take the phone call who is just coming in, the caller. So inshallah, we're just going to wait for the studio to patch the person in. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Okay. Oh, Sheikh Hasim, how are you doing?
La ilaha illallah. MashaAllah, it's so nice to hear mashallah from Sheikh Zakir and mashallah from yourself. Allah SWT accept from you and Allah SWT accept.
Ameen, ya Rabbi.
But of course, I've run because I have a question. It's a very important question. Sheikh Zakir, Bismillah, I wanted to ask you, mashallah, you just mentioned about one of the people who will be somewhat exempt from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will be those who sever family ties. Now, subhanAllah, that's maybe somewhat of a tricky question, but something really, really important to me. But at times in families, you have so many feuds, and every family has problems, of course. But you see, at times, you kind of tend to see those whom you don't take advantage, whom we don't take advantage of. And what I mean by that is, they don't seem to bring you closer to Allah. They don't seem to bring you closer to Allah. They don't seem to bring you closer to the words of Rasulullah. La ilaha illallah. So now, of course, could you possibly just, in that particular pretense, could you just kind of somewhat define?
Can I just summarize your question for our listeners? So what you're saying is, so Shaykh Zakir mentioned about one of the category of people in the month of Ramadan who Allah will not allow into His Jannah. One of those people are those who cuts relationship ties with their own family. And your question is, what about those people who do not bring you closer to Islam, and that's why you've had to cut relationship or reduce your communication with those family members? And that's your question, is how do you deal with that situation? Okay, shall we pass that to Shaykh Zakir?
Now, what we learn from our teachers and our scholars and our great deen is that the mu'amala is not according to what your interaction with them is not according to their interaction with you, but it's something greater and more elevated than this. Allah said, "Idfa' billati hiya ahsan," and He push away that, or to respond to that which a person has done to you, with that which is greater and better than it. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned to one of his companions, now when he said, what is husn mu'ashara, when he mentioned sul ma qata'ak wa'ati man haramak wa'fu man zalamak, he said, bring together those who sever you, who don't keep contact with their closest or their family members, but rather be of that person who is that person who brings people together. And then also give of those that withhold from you. They may withhold from you, but your interaction with them is not according to their interaction with you. Your interaction with them is according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So maybe they've raised certain voices against you or said certain things which may not be true, but nonetheless you don't interact with them according to how they've interacted with you, but rather you interact with them according to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes you to interact with them. And your ajr and your reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be tremendous, inshallah ta'ala. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَعْفُوا مَنْ عَمَّنْ ظَلَمَكَ, and then forgive the person who's oppressed you. And even though he may have wronged you and that oppression against you has been such that has caused you maybe great pain, but nonetheless, this is the time for forgiveness. This is the time to put those differences aside. This is the time for us to pick up the telephone and to ring the person and to make amends in this time before the Laylatul Qadr comes. We only have one night remaining before that night starts to commence with us. And this is the time for us to return back to them. Even though the person, you may feel that they weaken you in your faith, but nonetheless, them weakening you in your faith cannot be any more weaker than the fact that you have a compulsory responsibility to some of them, which has to be maintained. So our interaction with people is not according to their interaction with us. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ, when he entered in Makkah al-Mukarramah, we learn throughout the life of the Prophet ﷺ. When he entered into Makkah al-Mukarramah, he said, "La tathriba alaykum al-yawm." There's no harm upon you. And he said the same word that Sayyidina Yusuf said to his brothers after they had harmed him for many, many decades. Yes. So this is how, inshallah ta'ala, we interact with those with others, and this is not something that comes easily. Rather, it's with great effort sometimes, and a great with great inner resolve that you have to have in order for this to take place. And this comes, inshallah, when we remind ourselves that ultimately we are slaves of Allah, ibadillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that our interaction with people is not according to their interaction with us, but rather with interaction of how Allah has commanded. Idfa' billati hiya ahsan. And respond with that which is better, respond with that which is more elevated, respond with that which is more greater. And with that, inshallah ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places within those people of ihsan. And in Allah yuhibbul muhsinin, Allah loves the people of ihsan, those who do better to the other people, inshallah.
So essentially, this is the inner fight, the jihad that we have to have. I was mentioning to you earlier about Sheikh about not eating overly filling our stomach, and it's one of the essential. And you said maintaining those ties is a fard from every Muslim. So I hope this answers your question, Sheikh Hasib.
I'm no more Sheikh. But wallah, that was an absolutely beautiful answer. Jazakallah. Thank you so much.
Barakallah, Sheikh Hasib. Speak to you soon, inshallah.
Inshallah, excuse me.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Barakallah feek.
Alhamdulillah, yes, as we just mentioned just a moment ago, it's about inner resolve, inner mettle. And this is something that Ramadan and he trains us to do. When I said لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, that is that inner resolve. The Prophet ﷺ said, خِيَارَكُمْ فِي الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ خِيَارَكُم فِي الْإِسْلَامِ إِذَا تَفَقَّهُوا. He said the best of you in Jahiliyyah, pre-Islam, or best of you in Islam, only if you understand your faith. And part of us understanding our faith is for us to realize that it's not just about the outward forms of worship like I've mentioned. It's about the inner reality that creates within our hearts, inshallah ta'ala. Hence we keep hearing لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. We keep hearing this, and I'm sure we've heard it repeated many a time from our ulama and our khutbah. And this is because it's the inner essence and inner kernel of a person and the metal of a person that we are attempting in this month of Ramadan to change, inshallah ta'ala. So when the month of Ramadan ends, it's not as if it's ended, rather it continues within our souls and within our hearts and with our interaction with others. This is what scholars sometimes call this the Madrasa Ramadaniya. They call this the Madrasa of Ramadan, meaning it's a place in which a person comes and they transform themselves and go through a transformation in which they are not the same person when they enter the month of Ramadan, but rather a different person, inshallah. Inshallah ta'ala.
So Sheikh, alhamdulillah, I think from the second part of the program, from what I've taken from it, you focus a lot on the people. First part, you focus on how to benefit from it, but now also what not to do to not benefit from it. And one of the things that we focus on greatly is cutting off ties from our family members. And from what I've taken so far from it is, what kind of a person are you if you can't even maintain your relationships with your own family members, and you want to maintain a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So we're not going to get to the hereafter by bypassing this world. We have to go to the hereafter by living through the world here. So consolidate what you've got around you. So focus on your own family members, on your own ties, before you start thinking, how am I going to improve the relationship with Allah? So by maintaining those here, the fara'id of this dunya, we're going to be able to consolidate the relationship with Allah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to have our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but our relationship with Allah is predicated upon our relationship with the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning creation. This is why the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, أَحَبَّكُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَنْفَعَكُمْ لِعِيَالِهِ. The most beloved of you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's most beneficial to the wider family of humanity. This hadith mentioned by Tabarani and others, and attested in many other hadith also, always points towards the fact that أَقْرَبَكُمْ إِنْدِي مَنْزِلَةً يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَحْسَنُكُمْ أَخْلَاقًا. The most of you closest to me on Yawm al-Qiyamah, to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And imagine, this is the Prophet, Sayyid al-Qawnayn wal-Thaqalayn, the person who is the leader of the universe, whom Allah has placed him to be the foremost person, whom all of creation is second only to him. The person who will be the closest to him, who will be the closest to him, according to the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the person closest to him will be the person who has the best of akhlaq and character. So the month of Ramadan, as well as being a month of worship, I go back again to this thing, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Taqwa, like we mentioned, is not just God-fearing between you and God, you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also your relationships with others and those who have rights upon you. They also have a role, they also have a relationship with you, and that is predicated upon how Allah has demarcated that relationship should be with you.
Sheikh, if I could just pick up on one of the things that you also said in the second part of this program, is actually, you mentioned taqwa a few times, I'm quoting the ayah, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, but you also said about sincerity. And this is something even me who have, considering the topic, is, do we have a sincerometer, if I could coin a term here? How do we measure our sincerity in this month of Ramadan, or whatever you've been talking about, as we implementing it, instead of saying, right, I heard Sheikh Zakir saying this, I'm going to go do it, versus of where do we draw the line and say, this has moved my heart and I want to do it now because I want to get closer to Allah and this is what I need to do, then I'll do it. But how do we draw the line between saying, I've read it, I've heard it, I'm doing it, sami'na wa ata'na, or saying, oh my God, this is, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be the friend of Allah. I'm going to end up in Jahannam. How do we know where our sincerity is kicking in?
Ultimately, just to pick up on a couple of points there, Sidi. Ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Qadi al-Qudat, and Allah is the judge of all judges. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one who will judge of the final abode of each separate different person. But ultimately, see, our you could say barometer, you could say, if you use a better word for our intentions, is first of all just to think that if this action was not being viewed by others, only by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would it have the same degree of strength, or the same degree of us fulfilling this particular action? If you would still fulfill the action, alhamdulillah, our ikhlas is, mashallah, our intentions, inshallah, are sound. But if it's weakened in terms of the strength of the performance of the action, then although the action itself is accepted, but the weakness in the action has to be rectified, which means that we still, inshallah ta'ala, have to continue on our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make sure that our actions are totally and khalis li wajillah, are absolutely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Inshallah, Shaykh. I think that was a good reminder. I know I've asked you this question many times, and I think my stomach will not have this feel until I meet the Creator Himself. Inshallah, I'm being encouraged by by our blessed friend here to ask Sheikh to make, because we're coming too close to our program. If you could summarize what you said and also make dua for us, because many of our listeners are going to go to iftar soon, inshallah, and looking forward to that first date and the water on the tongue. So Sheikh, I'll pass that over to you.
Now, in summary, inshallah ta'ala, is that realize that Ramadan is there for change. It's not a season that comes and goes in which we fast and then we open our fast and we carry on with the rest of our lives, but rather make it your intention. This is the year. This is the Ramadan. In these last 10 days, inshallah ta'ala, I will transform my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll transform my faith to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will fulfill my obligation of those which may have been negligent or weak in performing. It's only with those intentions, inshallah, Ramadan for us will be that month in which when Allah said, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, a month of change, a month of transformation, as it was for those that came before us, inshallah ta'ala. And as the Salaf, as you mentioned, the early generation, they used to fear that their actions were not accepted in the month of Ramadan after Ramadan had ended, because they were aware that perchance that we perform these actions only in the month of Ramadan and not continue outside the month of Ramadan, but rather we want to continue of that which we are upon outside the month of Ramadan in our worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to what He has prescribed for us, inshallah ta'ala. So we beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala His final moments of this day, inshallah, as we're approaching iftar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us and makes us one of the people of taqwa and piety, and make us those who are upright, and make us people who walk under the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and guide us upon light, and make us people whose hearts become imbued with light, and those whom light is in front of, light is behind us, and those whom recite the book of Allah according to how it should be recited, according to all its obligations, and fulfilling all of His commands, and restraining from all of its prohibitions, and making people who Allah places within us the divine light of guidance, and keeps us upon guidance, and forgives us for all of our shortcomings, of our sins, and enters into the higher stations of paradise. اللهم اخرجنا في الاسماء العليين الصديقين والشهداء والصالحين بدون مسابق العذاب ولا عتاب ولا فتنه ولا حساب، ارحم الراحمين، وفاق ذاك والدينا ذرياتنا احبابنا يوم الدين، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد بن امي وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين. اللهم انك قريب عفو تهب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم، اجعلنا سيئات كلها اجمعين، وادخلنا يا رب العالمين في رحمتك في زمرة اوليائك يا ذو القوة المتين، فانك على كل شيء قدير. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، والسلام على المرسلين، الحمد لله رب العالمين.